Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. As the battle over allowing certain classroom curricula continues into 2025, two opposing groups shared milestones and failures from the past year regarding explicit books in the classroom. Joining me to dig into this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, book bans or book removals, depending on your perspective on the issue, were an ongoing story this past year. How did PEN America recap this past year?
Yeah, absolutely. So PEN America, for people who might not be familiar with it, is a leading voice in advocacy, an organization that stands against efforts to remove books from libraries. And they call it book bans. So these instances where books are taken off of shelves or put out of reach from children, that's their preferred terminology. We usually use book removals because it's very neutral, and sometimes books aren't being banned; they're being removed temporarily and then put back. So I think it's a little bit more clear there. But they said that there were 10,000 instances of book bans or book removals in 2024, according to the senior advisor for communications for the organization, Suzanne Trimmel. And she said that they tracked 10,046 instances of book banning during the 2023-2024 school year, and that's a 200% increase over the previous school year. So I think that, in the last few years, this has been a bigger issue since the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw a lot of parental involvement. We've seen a lot of parents getting up at school board meetings and reading passages from these titles to the school board. We've seen some microphones being pulled and cut, and some even times, a police escort. And, there's different reasons for that. Sometimes it's not just that this explicit material, but maybe they've used up all their time and they want to keep going. Different kinds of things like that can be an issue. But in the last few years, PEN America says since 2021 that they've recorded 16,000 instances of book bans. So there's that increase kind of exponentially there. I think if you're talking about 10,000 during the 2023-2024 school year. One thing to note too is PEN America, if a book is removed at any time, that's described as a removal. So there are different states now that require that kind of removal process as part of a challenge. So while books are being challenged, they're removed from shelves, and that's kind of baked into the law in a couple of states. So I think that those are some of the bigger drivers of that, and that's a relatively new thing. And again, PEN America is an advocacy organization that says essentially that students should be able to read what they need because it provides a foundation for their lives. And as Trimmel said, whether critical thinking, empathy across differences, personal well-being, or long-term success, that's what books can offer them. And, quote, undermining the freedom to read for students is a direct assault on their basic rights under the Constitution. So any kind of limitation, PEN America says, is undermining a child's right to read what they want and should be able to read. They mentioned the organization mentioned several lawsuits that it's part of, including one in Florida. They filed a federal lawsuit against censorship in Escambia County in Florida. The organization says they want to show that the county violated students' right to free speech and equal protection under the law by removing or restricting those books. So that's like they're a big challenge that they have undertaken in the courts to try to show that violated students' rights. I mean, Florida is a big state for that. Like they've had the government there has the legislature has passed laws, and Governor DeSantis has also been a big critic of some of these books in the classroom. So that's a big state for kind of the fight there.
And kind of on the other side of this issue, what did Moms for Liberty have to say looking back over 2024?
So Tiffany Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, spoke with Chalkboard News and essentially said what they've seen is a lot of progress in 2024. And as I mentioned before, Justice pointed out that, quote, you have parents all over the country getting up and reading material that was found in libraries. You had school board members who were shocked, dismayed, uncomfortable, shut off mics, like that they're making their point. So essentially, Justice said, we've seen a lot of sentiment out there saying that these are not okay for our students to read, and that they've shown just how much, quote, explicit graphic sexual content that has made its way into our schools. And so that we need to address it. And so that's what they see is a win. Justice also said that they don't really track how many explicit books have been removed. They don't really have a mechanism, and said, quote, "We don't celebrate the need to remove books. It doesn't make them happy, and that it's a waste of taxpayer money." But essentially that, quote, "it should never have happened in the first place." So I think that that's her position, her organization's position, is that it shouldn't have been in there in the first place. But, making people aware of it and trying to get sort of that, we shouldn't have this in the classroom or in the school library, sort of the focus. So again, going back to Florida, they're claiming a legislative success there, the House Bill 1467, which has that process and procedure for librarians for how they buy books. And it also created that process for parents to be able to challenge titles. So if you get up at a school board meeting and you read from a book that is one of the libraries and the school board stops you, Justice said, because they feel it is inappropriate content that you shared at their meeting, that book immediately gets removed from the school. So kind of codifying that. So again, I think Moms for Liberty has stressed a lot of the common sense sort of approach there, and saying we're not banning books. You can go out and buy this book. It's not like the government's telling you can't read it. It's just saying from a taxpayer perspective, do you want kids to have access to this if we can't read it at the school board meeting, or if it's not okay to read here? And then I think you do have, critics of that view coming back and saying, well, if you look at the book as a whole, does it fail to be art? Is it of just a prurient interest? And so I think then you kind of have that back and forth of really what we seem to be arguing is are these kinds of explicit scenes okay in context? Or are they never okay? What is art? Some of these bigger questions that are more unsolvable in a school board meeting, but are currently being litigated in, states like Florida, right? Where they're saying you're removing a student's right to read. And the state has taken a position and said, no, we are not going to have these kinds of materials in our school library. So how do you sort of legislate that? And, the Supreme Court has some guidelines, but their guideline is, when you see it in terms of what shouldn't be allowed. And so that kind of makes it difficult of, well, who determines that, and at what level should you do it? And should the state or should the county? And so it just gets really messy really quick. And that's kind of, a recap of a lot of the news that we've done over 2024 are these very intense fights over what should be allowed in school libraries and in classroom libraries. And I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.